Welcome to Forever White Belt. I'm your host, Adolfo Fronda. Today on the show, we have Richard Bresler. Richard is a 6th-degree Jiu-Jitsu black belt and the author of the book Worth Defending. Richard is widely recognized as the first American student of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and worked closely with Rorion Gracie for almost 20 years. He played an essential role in growing Jiu-Jitsu through the Gracie Garages, the Gracie Academy, and the early days of the UFC. Richard was also one of the first Americans to earn a teaching certificate through the original instructor certification program at the Gracie Academy and to earn a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In our conversation, Richard shares his experience of learning from the Gracie family and his passion for Jiu-Jitsu. We dive deep into his book, Worth Defending, which tells the story of his 40-plus year involvement with the Gracie family. So if you're a fan of Jiu-Jitsu or looking to start your journey in this beautiful martial art, stay tuned and let's get started with our latest episode of Forever White Belt. Just a reminder to please give us a 5-star review on Apple Music and Spotify and share this podcast with a friend. It really helps us out. Please leave us feedback and suggestions on how we can improve the show and become a VIP member for only 99 cents a month. Yes, less than $1. Get ad-free episodes at anchor.fm/foreverwhitebelt/subscribe. Like us on Facebook and TikTok at Forever White Belt. And check us out on Instagram at Forever White Belt Show. Go buy your Forever White Belt swag at teespring.com/forever-white-belt. Check us out on YouTube now at Forever White Belt. Finally, if you ever get to beautiful Northern California, please come roll with us at North Bay Jiu Jitsu in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. They're amazing instructors and everyone there are great people. Mention the podcast and get 2 weeks free. And with that, I give you Richard Bresler. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So, wow, what a background, what a journey that you have. Are you correct me if I'm wrong, is it 6th degree black belt?
Yes.
And is it in your black belt is under who?
Fabio originally gave it to me, and then I also got a black belt from Rorion about 10 or 12 years later.
And when you say Fabio, can you clarify for the listeners, Fabio who?
Fabio Santos. He's either a black belt under Hickson or Halls.
So your jiu-jitsu started because of a mattress. Is that correct?
Yeah,
American Jiu-Jitsu started because of a mattress. Is that how we can sum this whole thing up?
Yeah, it started because I had a mattress, an extra mattress, and I happened to sell it, and Rorion Gracie just happened to need a mattress at the time. That's when my journey began.
I know that you had a deep love for the fast food business, correct?
You know, I did when I was a kid. And, I mean, look, I didn't just have a love for it. I got to have a burger and fries and a Coke anytime I wanted it. I mean, I had my own dispenser at work.
I mean, you were born into it, kind of, right?
Yeah, I was born into it. Well, my father was part of a conglomerate that was in the Midwest, most likely based out of Chicago, Bresler's Ice Cream. And then Henry's Drive-Ins were a kind of like the competition at one time for McDonald's that my dad opened a bunch across the Midwest. So my dad was in the fast food business then, and when he left his brothers, he came out here and he stayed in the fast food business.
All joking aside, you weren't terribly enthralled with being so immersed into that business because you found it more as sort of a transactional sort of relationship with individuals, right? As opposed to like something more.
For most people, not all, if a person chooses this for a career, whatever, you know, that's their path. But since I started in it when I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old, by the time I was 16, you know, I was already a seasoned, I worked every position in the place. I cleaned the drains, I worked the grill, I did the fryer, I worked the window. I mean, I knew how to do everything. And it was cool then. I mean, I really enjoyed that because, you know, being the boss's son was good. And then as I got older, you know, maybe even 18, 19 years old, I kind of managed the place for a little bit. And then after a while, just working with my dad, who was super critical, trying to make things perfect. And after a while, I went I didn't feel any interaction with the customers. And it was just because people come in that all they want to do is they want their hamburger, french fries, and a Coke, and they want to move on. And you being part of the business, you have to go, yeah, okay, next. We're trying to, occasionally you'd see somebody, I'd see a cute girl, I'd say, hi, how are you? But you still couldn't get much time with them at the register. So I started to kind of go like, okay, like what's the long range goal? Where am I going from here?
So then, 10, 19 years later, you stumble onto Horion, right?
Just before my 28th birthday, so I was 27.
So then you meet Horion. He does his, hey, do you want to try some jiu-jitsu stuff that he was so famous for early on, right? You want to try this self-defense stuff out from this champion family that no one believed because no one knew, what jiu-jitsu was, or everything back then was karate or
kung fu
kumites
or whatever.
Yeah, kung fu, right?
Yeah, so, when he asked me if I had any experience, I told him I boxed a little bit, and, I just didn't want to sound like I knew nothing. And then when he told me about his family, like I said, I've said before, the first thing I thought it was like, yeah, sure, you come from this family of champions, and yet you're trying to get the most out of this deal to get some extra sheets for your bed. And I just figured if they were that successful, they had money. That's my own personal judgment. Anyway, so I went over to his place and took a class, and I went, wow, this is amazing.
I know that you've spoken before of like having a life of service, and I'm paraphrasing here, and why you went from like the fast food business to the jiu-jitsu business, for lack of a better description. Do you think this is inherent in most people? This sort of like, one of the things I see oftentimes are some white belts that want to teach other white belts, right? Who've just learned a little bit more than the other white belt. And I often wonder, why are they doing this? But then you realize that it makes you feel really good to be able to help someone else, right? Even if it's a little kernel of, a little bit more than someone, or you can help someone. It makes you feel really good.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have that differential sort of feeling from, like, let's say, the fast food business to instructing?
Well, one of the things that I was good at, and I didn't even realize it back then, but since I had done every single job in the fast food business, when I was in charge, I was training the other people to do the thing, which didn't take much training back then. I mean, look, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work a grill. You turn the grill up to 350, whatever, and you flip a hamburger when at a certain time, and you take a little spatula and you cut it to see if it's done or not, and you pull the burger.
Right.
Whatever it is, it's to clean a drain. I mean, it's to filter out shortening. Whatever it is, it doesn't take much. But I was good at showing others what to do. But this was a whole new thing. So when I learned this, one of the things that Horion told me to do too, he says, early on, he said, don't show your friends or whatever. And I said, why? And he says, because and I understand, because a lot of times I'll see other people, I'll do a move in class, and they'll start to do the move, and then the new student says, well, what if they do this? And then they start going into more, and I see them going like, oh gosh. So what he was saying, don't correct a mistake, just start on a raw slate. Show them the right way the first time. So, and I'll kind of do that, but you can't stop. I mean, people want to share this thing that they discovered. I understand it. But that's what makes me want to keep sharing it, because I have a gift for it.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning somewhere where I think you were actually showing back in the day he's like, I could choke you with I think it was a sweatshirt or something like that. A towel. Can you describe that story?
I went over to my parents' house, and my brother and his friend are hanging out together, and I was telling them I'm doing this new martial art called Jiu-Jitsu, and they're like, because they were both kind of in a striking, I think Tung Soo Do. And I said, yeah, I could basically take this beach towel, it's the summertime, and throw it around your neck and choke you with it. And he goes, yeah, right. So I took the thing, I flung it around his neck, and he goes, whoa. And he immediately says, well, where do I learn this? So, my brother didn't really do it, but his friend, went over, and he actually was my training partner for a few years.
What was that like to be, to see the birth of jiu-jitsu in the U.S. Prior to those UFC years, to the beginning of the UFC? Because, you mentioned Tang Soo Do. That's all we had, right? In the early days was Black Belt Magazine, and we'd see all these things, and no one knew, what would win what, or what was real and what wasn't real. And you saw the sprouting of it within this country anyways. What was that time like, that incubation period?
Oh, gosh, I feel like my life, I've happened to meet people that were instrumental in change. And Rorion was just one of them, probably the most that had the biggest profound change in me.
And you are like the Forrest Gump of jiu-jitsu.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But yeah, people have called me, student zero, patient zero.
Yeah.
Because I had come from such a, let's say there was a lot of imbalances in me as a person just because of my drug uses, that when I discovered this, I was excited about it. And I wanted to share this with everybody. So I'd get a little crazy about talking to people like, oh yeah, people talk, oh, karate and this, and I'm going like, wait a sec, this would, I said, my teacher, if he fought Bruce Lee, he would probably destroy the guy. I'm like, come on, Richard, what? It's, so I would always be excited. I'd always want to bring somebody down, and, occasionally I'd bring them down and they'd be convinced and they'd sign up, or they'd walk away going that he was lucky. But just to see this thing happening, it's amazing how it just kind of started blossoming, because I'd be excited about it. I'd tell somebody, and then they'd tell somebody. And Rorion always offered their student a free class if you brought someone else in, if they start taking classes. And so it all of a sudden you'd start to see this in 1980 when Rorion and I became roommates. I'd start to see more and more and more, his schedule filling up. And I was fortunate enough to help him with, because I lived there. If he said, hey, do you want to help out with this class? I'm like, put my gi on, I'm downstairs.
Wow.
And just to watch it, it's hard to describe how it was just growing and blossoming.
Wow. Was it like a slow sort of burn, or was it like a hockey stick type of, graph?
No one knew what jiu-jitsu was, so it was
This is
very,
all word of mouth, right?
Yeah, it was all word of mouth. So it was kind of slow, because remember, the only place that you could really in Southern California learn jiu-jitsu was Rorion's, was our garage.
Yeah.
So how big can it get there? Even though he had a cousin that technically was here before Rorion, up in San Francisco area, no one ever heard of the guy. Because someone heard of my story or whatever, and they sent me a message going, I forgot the guy's name. I forgot, maybe it was Carly Gracie or something. They said, oh, he was up here and someone learned before you. And I'm like, okay, but no one heard of this. Yeah. So he wasn't doing anything. He didn't have the maybe the mindset that Rorion did, and the professionalism, and pulling more people in to do this, to come over and take a class.
You touched upon your using. We should probably clarify for the listeners, if I didn't in the intro already, that Richard, how would you say you are a drug addict? How do you describe yourself in terms of that sort of subject?
I wouldn't even call myself an addict. I was a user.
Okay.
I used regularly for a couple of years, cocaine and Quaaludes, and I smoked pot for probably, maybe a good 7 or 8 years, regularly. And then toward, right before I met Rorion, my usage of cocaine and Quaaludes were starting to become pretty regular. Cocaine every day, and then when I could get Quaaludes,
Wow.
An addict's a strong word. I was a functional user for the most part. I'd go with the people who were really close to me. They could see how I was in a self-destructive mode for a while.
It's interesting that you mentioned Horian as a professional because he was, the way he interacted with you, probably, you guys were roommates, so he knew about your usage or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for all the other different personality types that he was talking into doing this unknown thing for these people, he would have to probably adapt to different people really quickly, and that takes a certain type of talent to market to each individual like that.
Well, Horian when I met, Horian's just a couple months younger than I am. So when I met him, he'd already been teaching since he was probably about 16 years old.
Wow.
So, he'd probably already been a teacher for 10 years in Brazil. So when he got here, and because the Elios side of the family, Horian's side of the family, were focused on teaching private classes, where Carlos' side of the family was kind of like more of a group type thing. And so they were used to dealing with sometimes like more professional type people. So, and Horian, he had an interesting philosophy to not focus on, I never got a lecture saying like, hey, don't do drugs, they're not good for you. Mm-hmm. It's just, here's what is good for you, and focus on that. And he never made me feel bad because of the choices that I was making.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You bring up the privates. Wasn't there some sort of path to blue, like X amount of privates, and then you're sort of belted?
Yeah. It was 40 half-hour classes. That's 20 hours of private instruction. And he says, then you're not really, you're not a beginner anymore. Then, your path begins. Because when I got to blue belt, I was like, what? And he goes, Richard, you're 3 times more effective now than you were when you came in. He said, but this is where it starts. You're not a beginner, you're a novice. And then I stayed a blue belt for 6 years. So, it was a path, because remember, there wasn't a lot of people to train with in those first couple years.
When you were training with other individuals, what was that like?
A lot of it was just situational training at first. Putting us like past the guy's guard and then stop or whatever. We didn't really start doing a lot of training. It's hard to really remember. And then after a while, we'd have like certain things. But during classes, he'd have like, I'd help out with a class. Or maybe the guy would come into my class waiting for his class, and he'd say, okay, see if you can pass Richard's guard. Okay, Richard, you do this, and stop him from passing your guard, or you do this, just so we can practice a move. But after a while, Sunday morning, we had like a small little group of us that we had like a 2-hour, sparring class where we'd work on different things. We'd work on headlocks, escapes, or different types of things. There's maybe 6 or 8 of us.
So many people portray the early days of jiu-jitsu as this like scrap, right? And this, what you're describing, sounds like an intelligent type of training situation with situational sparring and this type of thing.
Well, that's because of Horian. Horian really had a method to what he was doing. He definitely had things planned out, and that's one of the reasons why he's really the best teacher in the family.
Which belt is the most important, do you believe?
The white belt. It's making that decision to get in there and do it. And you know what? I don't know if I can put an importance on any one belt. I think what's really important is finding a good teacher. Finding somebody, because I was talking to someone yesterday, and I'm not going to mention the name of the school that he was in. He was in a different state. He contacted me, and he told me where it was at. And he's also in his, I'm guessing, mid-40s. But he also had an injury. That's one of the reasons that he was calling me, because he read my book, and it said something in there about what I've done to keep my body, surgery-free and recover from injuries. So we talked, and I said, probably one of the biggest things is finding the right school where it's not a big competition school, because after a while, most people, they're getting injured. I have guys that, I have quite a few students that are in their either late 30s, early 40s, and some 50s, they don't want to be doing competitions. They just want to look at the self-defense, they want to have fun, and they want to stay in this for a while. So, when I hear that these guys that are going in and it's go, and it's constantly points, and what jiu-jitsu in a lot of places it's been likened to high school wrestling. It's for the younger athlete, for someone who has the physicality and the athleticism. But I'm 71. I don't have that desire or the ability to do something like that. And I've been contacted by guys that are in their 50s that just say, you know what, my body can't take it.
I see this as a huge growing class, as people that are starting jiu-jitsu in their 30s and their 40s now. Do you believe those people can eventually get to black belt?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on their instructor, though. I think it depends on the focus of their instructor. They may not be the toughest guy, but look, after a while, I don't care how tough you are, you start getting older, you're not that tough. There's the bigger, stronger, younger guy coming in. And I've had these kind of questions, and talked to Horian in his office going, when I had some much bigger guys than me that were in my class that I was teaching, tapping me out. And I said, I don't think I should be teaching them. And he would say, Richard, can they learn from you? I said, yeah, they can learn a lot. And they said, okay, that's your answer right there. You don't have to beat everybody up. And eventually, I don't care who you are, you're going to get tapped out by that younger, bigger, stronger guy.
Sure.
But it's not about that. So, I teach people to do moves better than I ever executed them. I have a gift for showing them how to pull it off. I've even said to guys, can you show me how to do that? I said, I showed you how to do it, but I said, I can't do it as well as you do it. That's what a coach does.
How did you develop this talent for teaching?
In my book, I tell the story. There was a chiropractor buddy of mine that I met from jiu-jitsu, and he was going down. He started with Horian, and then Horian got busy, and then Horian said, started giving him Hoist as a teacher. Well, Hoist was a kid, and Hoist was trying to get better himself. So my buddy Brian would go and have a class with Hoist, and Hoist would, for lack of a better, he would kind of beat him up because he was practicing to get better himself. Not beat him up, but really, going like, wait a second, I'm supposed to be learning here. And I had the same experience with Hoist. So I didn't enjoy the classes like I enjoyed them with Horian. So my buddy, he's just about a year or two younger than me, and he lived very close to me, and he said, Richard, why don't you come over, bring your gi, and and he pulled his furniture out, and it was on his carpeting, and so I gave him a class, and I was a purple belt with no formal instruction. After the class, he said, man, you're a good teacher. I said, no, I'm not a teacher yet. And he said, yeah, you are. He said, you may not know it, but you are. And he said, I want to have classes with you. It was kind of like the story that you hear about, Carlos and Elio. So I said, well, I don't know about that. So, but, I started teaching him. And then, I started teaching a semi-private class before the instructor program in like 92. I started teaching these 4 guys that I was helping Horian out, and he got busy, and I said, look, why don't I teach them? We can charge them less money, you'll get money, and I'll get a little money. So it was a win-win-win for everybody. And he said, okay. And then shortly after that, he had the instructor program. There were me and 3 other guys. So, and I did that. And remember, I was around Horian. I was taught by Horian, the best teacher in the family, privately for 10 years.
Wow.
I would have a class, have a class with Hickson, have a couple with Hoist, Hoyler, who's a great teacher. They're all really good. I'd have a class with the old man. Get it that much, easier. What can I do to be better? So it's just something that it's inside of me. I love doing it, and I want to do it as long as they'll let me do it.
Now, you alluded to, and I'm remiss to not mention this even sooner, Richard has wrote a book. I have yet to read it. I hear wonderful things about it. It's called Worth Defending. It's on the screen for those of you who are watching now. And you can get it at Amazon. I know that you guys, any of your book, I'm sure distributors, whatever. And you have an audiobook version of it too. Can you give us sort of an overview, synopsis, and in terms of the story of the book and sort of what went into writing the book and with your partner and et cetera?
One of the gifts that I have for teaching was I happened, and I talk about this guy briefly in my book. I went to a therapist in 1982 who was a brilliant therapist. He was an NLP therapist, neuro-linguistic programming. Right. And one of the things that he told me early on is he said that when people come to you for advice or something like that, instead of saying, well, here's what you should do, you do this and you do this and you do this, and most people have a polarity response. They go like, yeah, you start telling me what I should do and I tune out. But what he would do is he'd start telling stories. You'd ask him a question about this and he goes, that reminds me of a client that I had a couple of years ago, and he was about your age, and you get so sucked into the story. And then when I started learning from this guy, because this therapist, he had classes about how to do this yourself. And even when I would come to him and I would have a situation and I'd say something, and he goes, that reminds me of this person. And I knew what he was doing, but I was so enthralled into his story that I knew he was going to give me advice because of certain things that I learned in therapy that are called an embedded command. So you're saying something in a story, saying yes, and even as I'm telling you this story, the smarter you're going to become, and the happier you're going to even become right now. Right this very second, you're going to be happier. So you're kind of like going, okay, and you're starting to get happy because he's, what's this guy playing with me? But anyways, so I would show a move, and then all of a sudden my brain would go, you know what? L.U. Gracie showed me this move back at the academy when I went in there, and all of a sudden everybody just kind of like, okay, he went into story mode, and I'll spend a couple minutes going, yeah, when I did this and I asked him this, and so they're so like getting out of like I have to get this right, but they wanted to hear. So I would tell the story, show the move, and that became my style. So students kept saying, Richard, you should write a book. And I went, yeah, you're right, I should write a book. And then finally, there was a student of mine that started in 2006, and I mentioned in my book, named Chris, and Chris is now a black belt. He came to me, maybe 6 months before I really started working on the book. He said, Richard, you should really write a book. And I said, yeah, I know I should. And he goes, Richard, you really need to write a book. He said, don't brush me off, dude. And I'm like, whoa. And I said, okay. And that's when I contacted a student of mine. Her and I started working on it. I'd go over to her house that she called story time. And we spent a few months together, and then it kind of plateaued. And then I was looking for, because the name of the book, originally she said, she came up with the name, was going to be called something like Get in the Guard, which people didn't understand. So I said, I put out Facebook, I'm looking for the title of a book that I'm writing about my story. And so Scott reached out, turned into a phone call, and he said, I'm a writer, I can help you with this. So I sent him everything that we did, and then we had about, maybe 15 hours worth of phone conversations, just asking me, interviewing me, and then taking my story and then putting it in, giving it life, because I could not sit in front of a typewriter for more than 5 minutes without, as I'm thinking about this, I didn't know where to start, and if I did start, I'd go like, oh, you know what, I got to clean my place up, and I'd walk away from, I was too ADD. Yeah. So Scott, that's what he does, and now I have a book that's doing really well.
I was looking through some of the Google photos, which is a fun sort of jaunt through history of Richard. There's a picture of you and Helio, and he's holding this giant oversized check. Can you describe that moment?
That was the night of UFC 1, my job was to basically, I was a gopher. They took me along. Not only was I an investor in the UFC, but I was also, he said, okay, we're taking you with and whatever we need. So they gave me the check to keep in my hotel room until the night. And so I don't know how or where, but maybe on the same floor, Elliot was there, and I signaled him over to come in, and I was with my cousin. So I had this thing, and I said, hey, I said, I'm trying to tell him I want a picture of him. And so he just held the camera up, my cousin, and we stood next to him with the check, and I'm like, this is the ultimate fighter. And, with my crazy mustache.
Yeah, you look pretty cool.
Yeah. Back then it was called a porn stash.
Yeah, porn stash, yeah, for sure.
But, and I'm glad we happened to have a camera.
Yeah, you captured an amazing moment there. Can you tell me a little bit about 360 Defense Academy?
360 Self-Defense. Well, yeah. I was at Krav Maga for 22 years, right up until March 15th of 2020. And I was there for, since October of 97. And I met one of my students, and he was a brown belt in Krav Maga, very fast, very talented stand-up fighter, and he liked Jiu-Jitsu. But after a while over at Krav Maga, guys would leave there. They'd have some really talented guys. They didn't know how to hold on to the people. He said, Richard, I'm thinking about starting my own school. He said, would you be interested to come up there and teach class? And I'm like, heck yeah. So he asked me, and I started working for him one night a week. I was up at Krav, I was teaching 4 other classes or 5 other classes a week there, and then at Ricky's place. And then Krav had to everything shut down. But after a while, he said, hey, would you like to teach? And I'm like, yeah, I would like to teach. He said, okay, come in. I probably shouldn't admit to this because, we were shut down, but I don't think they're going to come out after anybody this, it's not like we committed a capital offense. But so I was teaching for him. It's a small little place over by LAX, and it's a nice bunch of guys, really good attitude. And the jiu-jitsu program is growing. And, I've had a couple guys that were students that came with me, because when I first went there, we had, maybe 1 blue belt and the rest white belts. One of the guys that I used to teach, who's a purple belt, came in. The guy that was the blue belt when he came over there is now a purple belt. There were a couple other purple belts that I used to teach. One of them came with me, and the other guy was was learning at a different school. And we had talked, and he heard more about me, and he left his school to come over and train with me. So now we have 4 purple belts, a handful of blue belts, and white belts coming in. So, and it's a really good atmosphere of learning. And like I said, we're building. So I really like what Ricky's done over at 360.
So Richard, did you ever have an academy? And can you tell me the story of that?
I kind of got, for lack of a better term, got kicked out of the Gracie Academy. I was teaching there for 3 years, and Hori and I had a falling out. As I left there, I didn't know what I was going to do, and one of my students from Gracie Academy called me up and said, hey, what are you doing? He said, what are you doing? I said, right now, nothing. He says, well, why don't we open a school? And I said, just money, because, it's more than just getting a loan from the bank, and I didn't have the name, and I didn't want to be by myself to teach. So he said, look, let's get you and Lowell. Lowell was a buddy of mine who, we were both brown belts at this time, and we became good buddies. So this one guy said, look, he says, I got the money, you guys bring the talent. So we opened Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu, that most people don't know about because they've heard of Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu, but we didn't put anything in writing. And I got, Lowell ended up walking away because we had the first $100 a month unlimited classes. And so, just to get that, and we got 50 guys right away, but you do the math.
Wow.
It's not a lot of, $5,000 a month when your rent is got to be, back then, in Beverly Hills, had to be at least, between $2,000 and $3,000.
Right.
Not a lot of money left over. And I was getting unemployment. And Lowell was, I think he was married, and he just like went, you know what, I can't support myself. We do private classes, and so we both ended up walking away, and I was kind of pushed out. And then I went like, wait a second, and I just realized, for me to open a school, it's like, I don't want the headache. I mean, I see what other guys have done, and if I was going to do it, I would go into an existing academy, maybe a karate academy or something, and just say, look, I'd like to teach jiu-jitsu here because they have the business license. They don't have to do anything extra except get some mats for the floor. But I didn't want to do that because of the responsibility.
Your thoughts on what makes a great jiu-jitsu student?
Someone who comes in that just wants to learn, that will listen to what the teacher has to say and trust the process. Because if you ask any of my students, what one word am I constantly saying over and over again, they will tell you it's relax. Because when you are learning a move, if you're tense and you're trying to use power with it, you're not going to get the essence. You're not going to be able to feel what the other person's doing. It's like if you're so laser focused on yourself, then it's like the person who's self-conscious. They can't look at that person and look for verbal cues, look for any other nonverbal communication to see if they're uncomfortable or whatever it is. So just the process, just come in with an open slate. And that's one of the reasons why I really like teaching kids and women, because they don't have, you get a big, stronger guy, they have gifts and they want to test themselves. They want to show with their power. You do it, you show them a choke and they're like ready to break your neck, and I'm going like, wait a second, I said, look, I'll choke you and you won't even feel my choke, but you have to be ready to tap because the blood's going to stop going to the brain. But I won't crank your neck. So it's just someone who comes in with an open mind that just really has that and wanting to learn. But like Horian said, there's no such thing as a bad student. There's only good and bad teachers. So that's why I said before, you have to find the right school for you.
So touching upon that, conversely, what makes a great teacher?
I think somebody who puts their focuses on their students and how much he can help them learn.
Can you tell me a time that you saw something in jiu-jitsu that changed the direction of your teaching or your outlook or your game?
Yeah, when I looked in the mirror one day and went like, wow, I'm getting old. Like when I first started, I mean, it's like I'd go in there and whatever, mix it up. The guy was bigger. I'd still do it without really, I might be scared, but I'd just still do the move. I'd still say, okay, well, maybe he'll beat me, but I'd still do it. Then, after about close to 10 years in, I started noticing the guys were coming in, they were still bigger and stronger and younger, and they would try to force moves, and I noticed that my shoulders, because they'd try to give me an arm lock, they'd be pulling on the arm, and I'd just have to use my body, but still, as they're doing that, my technique wasn't completely spot on, so I was having problems like recovering. So then I started saying, okay, I'm going to be really selective who I choose to spar with. Then I got into my 40s, and I just got even more selective. And then I stopped doing, like when I got into my 50s, like I'd go into a class. This was at Krav Maga. It was kind of like a testing ground all over again, because Krav Maga was a very aggressive art. And I would come in and I'd tell these guys to relax, and I'd show a move, and the person would say, well, Richard, what if the guy does this? And and then I'd put myself down with this guy who has got maybe 80 pounds on me, just to show that it's possible. And I go like, what am I doing this for? Why am I putting myself in the line of fire when I'm going to risk getting hurt? So I kind of, walked further and further away from that, just to be more careful, because I wanted to preserve my body. And then into my 60s, it became more of that, but then even teaching, like when I was a young guy in my 20s, even early 30s, when someone would get in my guard, I didn't think much of letting them stacking me up, because I was flexible and I would shoot for an arm lock or a triangle and I'd spin underneath them. But it's not good to spin on the base of your
neck there, yeah.
Yeah, in your neck. So I'll tell guys, I said, look, avoid getting stacked up. You do not want to play that game. I know when you're young, you don't think about it, because I didn't think about it. But I said, I guarantee you that the kind of injury that I have, I've seen other people have, mostly in part of being stacked up. You know, I mean, it's a hard thing to practice if you're constantly being stacked up like that, or constantly training hard. It's hard on your joints. So I've adapted the way that I teach. You know, I say, look, if you want to do it, and we're helping the guys to become more careful and more focused on helping each other. And my guys hold their own with other, when they go to other schools. You know, it's not like we're just only focusing on one thing. We are majorly focused, but foundational jiu-jitsu is just that. It's foundational. You know, I used to be very concerned when I was in a Krav Maga school for a while, and then after a while, because we only had a certain limited amount of classes, a few guys would leave and they'd go to jiu-jitsu schools, and they would come back, and I would always kind of be a little nervous, like, oh gosh, these guys have been gone for 2 years. They're going to come back and eat all my guys up, you know, with all their new techniques from a different school. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. It wasn't even close to that. So I just realized that because of the teaching that I was given and basic fundamentals, good fundamentals they go across the board.
I wonder if making basics and fundamentals as saying them in an equivalent term does it a disservice over time, because it somehow almost denigrates fundamentals in a way, you know, the importance of them. People often mention Roger Gracie's cross-collar choke, but there's a lot of very intricate things going on. You know, he has improved upon the cross-collar choke, and there's a million different things going on in terms of mastering things like pressure, weight distribution, things you know, hand placement, things you know all about. And these are incredibly intricate things that over years can improve.
He hasn't improved the cross-collar choke. He's just mastered the cross-collar choke. How to get it, like the positionings, all that stuff requires practice and timing and over and over and over again, because if you ever watch the in action, Roger is a perfect example in a competition, but looking back, every time Rorion fought anybody, I don't think I ever saw him catch anybody in an arm lock. He always, if they had a gi on, he caught him in a cross collar. If they didn't have a gi on, he caught him in either a guillotine or a rear naked choke. He wanted to only choke people, and he was a master at it. No one teaches the choke better than Rorion does that I've seen. And his father, that was his father's go-to, cross-collar choke. His father, would tell story. His wrists, or my wrist would be like, his wrists were like, a half an inch wider. Rorion would tell me he'd sometimes take a tree trunk, wrap a towel around him, and just,
wow,
So the power of his choke is one thing, and then the timing and that was Rorion. He was very smooth at it, So he took it at one level, and Roger took that same thing and mastered it. Because what does he do? He passes the guard, side control, mounts, chokes. Basic, fundamental.
Let's talk about a little bit like the evolution of jiu-jitsu learning and teaching through the years that you've seen, and many of us have seen, when it went to books, where you could learn jiu-jitsu through books, you could learn sort of jiu-jitsu through magazines, and then we got to VHS, we got to DVDs, now we're doing online streaming, and now we have even online video studies are offered, remote online coaching, in addition to perhaps the academy that you're at, remote things like strength training and PT training. What's that looked like to you?
Well, I think it's all great. The first ones who I think that really did, Rorion had the VHS, and then Henzo and a guy named Craig Kukuk, I think he was one of the first, if not the first black belt, an American black belt, because he got it from, I think, Hoyler sometime in the early 90s. But, so they had a VHS, him and Henzo. And then Rorion and Hoyce had their thing, and then they did a little stint with a CD-ROM that lasted maybe a year. But just the technology got better and better and better. One, different angles. And when I see what the boys have done over at Gracie University and how they've expanded, and they took a lot of flack for this.
Yeah.
Look, there's no substitute for a person coming to me for a class, or a teacher for a private class. Then you have a group class. But if you're not near a school, or if you want something as an addition to your learning, this is as good as it gets online. Yeah, it's not going to be like being in front of somebody to do it. But when you don't have anything else, why not? And the same guys that gave him flack now are doing their own online stuff because they realize that, one, they can make a little extra money, and it is effective if it's done right.
Right. It seems like for the younger generation, I don't think they understand the amount of vitriol. We're talking about Henner, probably, right? That they took. I think the kids now would probably just scratch in disbelief of why. I guess if you're early on in anything, you're gonna take all the arrows.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just gotten better and better. I mean, and people have asked me. They said, Richard, when are you going to come up with content? And eventually, I'll probably put something out there. But I guess what I think is there's so much content because since the book, people have contacted me for private classes, black belts, brown belts, purple belts, and most of the time when they come to teach me, I see their basic moves: the triangle, the rear naked choke, the collar choke, the kimura, and I'll have them show me how they do it, how they explain it, and I always take what they showed me and make it better. I mean, I've had guys just sit there and go like, whoa, because I would show them something, and me telling you this, they'd say, well, I'm pretty technical myself, but I had more than one guy, but there's a guy who started with me in 95. He started the Gracie Academy. He was drawn to me, so I was his primary teacher. When I left in 96, and this guy was a kid, maybe back then was 20 years old, he followed me to Beverly Hills, and then I wasn't at Beverly Hills too long, and then we lost touch. And when he contacted me 3 years ago, he said, I remember you from the classes at the Gracie Academy, and I want to know where you're at. And he's a black belt now, and he's been to about 8 different schools. Wow. And he was at Paragon now in Central California. So he contacted me and he says, I'd like to have a private with you. And I said, well, great. And I said, look, I'm not going to spar with you. You're 45 years old and you're 175 and I'm 140. He says, no, I don't want to spar with you. He says, I want you to show me the same way you showed me when I was your student. They're interested in becoming teachers now.
Right.
And they are. They take a class, but they're not really a polished teacher. Someone showed them and they just showed them the best they can. So he would come over and take a private with me, and I would show him some basic stuff, and he would be blown away, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, or I didn't remember that from before.
Right.
So I started doing that when other guys would come to teach me, and they'd have the same kind of mentality, like, whoa, really, that little extra adjustment that you're doing right there makes the difference. So basically, my polishing has to do with teaching basics. And this one purple belt who I showed the same move, and he was kind of blown away. He said he wants to help me market to have teachers that are black belts come in just to learn from me. Same with this other black belt. And he said, look, people, they should really come in and learn because you know how to teach. You know how to teach the teachers. It's one thing to teach them. It's another thing to bring it across on a video. Because jiu-jitsu, to really get that finesse, has to be felt. You have to feel what that other person's doing. You can show a certain amount, but when you have that experience, nothing is like that experiential one-on-one. There's a close second, so the reason I haven't done it is just because I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I said, if I do it, I want to do it right. And I have people that want to help me, but it's still, I keep thinking the logistics of it.
I worry about this perfectionist, that it's going to delay this stuff too much. I was speaking with Henry Aiken some time back. He's one of the Hickson's first black belts, and both of you sound similar in that I know that you put a heavy emphasis on self-defense in terms of jiu-jitsu at its foundation, right? And that there's been a concern among some of the elder statesmen that this type of viewpoint framework has been or is fading in a way,
It is.
because of the sport perspective or whatever it may be. But what I'm finding is that it's important to document you guys, your jiu-jitsu and what so that the future generations have something, because they just need that. And the landscape is so flooded with another viewpoint that it's important to have that balance.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So what are you telling me?
So do it, Richard. Make it happen.
Okay.
Well, one of the things I want to know is, can you tell me a time when you considered quitting and why?
I did walk away from it in the early 80s. I walked away from it for a few months just because after becoming Horian's roommate and eating, I did the Gracie diet. It's hard to live with somebody and not, because I wanted to change and I just would have meals with him. And then I got interested in health. My focus went from, like the best pot or finding some good cocaine to like finding some good quality produce and, quality food. So I met a guy in the early 80s by the name of Harvey Diamond, and him and his wife, Marilyn, wrote a book, probably the largest best-selling diet book in the mid-80s, 85 I think it was, called Fit for Life. He had a seminar called The Diamond Method, and when I first saw him, he was in the early 80s, and he had 75 or 100 people. And he put a contact number out, and I contacted him, and I said, look, I'd like to take this further. I wanted, so he said, I'm having a class, very informal class at his house. And me and 3 or 4 other guys went to study with Harvey. So when I studied with him, he says, look, they have also a program where it's advanced studies, and you're going to be, they said for health, learning to fast. So I went to a fasting place, and then they said, look, you can also go to this other place. So I kind of walked away from it for, probably a good 9 months. And then Horian called me up and said, hey, do you want to...
Where you at?
Yeah, where you at? So I came back. But I realized once I started going back in there, I wanted to do jiu-jitsu again. So that was other than that, I really never wanted to quit.
There are a few things that you've mentioned in the show where you mentioned diet, you mentioned NLP, you mentioned, sort of therapy in a way, and jiu-jitsu. Was this just like a inflection point in your life when you went like self-improvement, so to speak?
Well,
and why?
When I was doing drugs, anyone who does drugs on a regular basis, you can't really like yourself because no one looks at themselves and sees that person who's 100 pounds overweight going, oh yeah, I look good. Feel good for yourself. Learn how to develop your head so you can have a goal saying, what can I do to become a healthier person now? By the way, that's an embedded command. What can I do to become a healthy right this very moment? When I was doing drugs, I went to therapy, and the therapist basically told me why I wasn't leaving the fast food business, because he told me I was afraid, and I focused on fear for a long time. And then I happened to be watching TV one morning as I was sitting down smoking a joint. Oh yeah, the guy says, how easy you can wipe fear out of your life. This was Dr. Dossi, the NLP therapist. So I called him up after going to see him once. 1 2-hour appointment after being in therapy for 2 years and group therapy for a year. I went back to the next group therapy, went in, I said, guys, thank you very much, I'm done. Just seeing this guy one time, because he gave me outcome things. Instead of saying, why am I the way I am? And if you ask yourself a question like that, you look unconsciously and consciously for an answer. Asking any question, that's what you do. You look for that answer. So if you ask yourself a better question, like, what's it going to take to change? How can I achieve what I want to achieve? Start asking yourself those questions so you can start unconsciously and consciously look for a better answer. And that's what Dr. Dossi helped me to do more of, is what can I do to improve my situation? It became that kind of a thing. And Horian was doing that. He was replacing, instead of saying, oh, you can't eat a Twix candy bar anymore, Richard, or you can't eat this, or you can't eat that. It was just like, eat meals with me. Focus on the good stuff. Let the bad stuff take care of itself. Forgive yourself. And Dr. Dossi spent time with me. Forgive yourself if you screw up. If I smoke a joint, or if I have a piece of chocolate cake or a Twix candy bar. It's okay. Just what am I going to do next? And that's the hardest thing, is we have to learn how to let it go. Forgive yourself, let it go, and give the affirmation of, I love you and you're worth it. And I'm talking about looking at yourself in the mirror saying, you're worth it, and change that. And forgiveness, it's the hardest thing. It's easy for people to say, oh, I forgive you if you wronged me, if I thought you did. But to forgive yourself, it's like we're so hyper critical of our own self, and I hear it all the time. People say, because I don't eat bad food of any kind, and they eat something and they go, yeah, I know I shouldn't eat this. And I said, don't shit on yourself or anyone else. Don't shit on me, don't shit on yourself. It's like you're doing it. Okay, what's done is done. What you could do next time is you might want to make a better choice. But shoulding makes you wrong, and you're criticizing yourself. And no one, if I were to tell you if you did something, I said, hey man, you shouldn't have done that. You don't feel good about that. So all these things that I learned how to do is to improve. And in the book talks a lot about this. People have contacted me because it's a self-help book. It's a book about jiu-jitsu. It's a book about alternative health. So that's kind of like my focus.
So that book again is called Worth Defending, everyone. Worth Defending. Available at all the How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life.
There you go. And you can find it at richardbresler.com or Amazon.
Richard Bresler. Richard, can you tell us how'd you learn to tie your belt?
Horian taught me. You know what? I see these guys do the fancy stuff. I look at it, and it stays. When they do it, it stays like that. But one over, the other one over, if it comes undone, I tighten it up.
A lot of people compare jiu-jitsu to chess. They like to make that analogy all the time. Is there a particular analogy that you like to compare it to?
Jiu-jitsu is chess.
Is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, the older you get, stuff has turned into like I said, it's a high school wrestling kind of mentality because it's physicality. There's techniques, but there's also a lot of physicality. And I don't have the desire or the testosterone for me to do that.
And I often tell people too, like, how many wrestling clubs do you see on the corner?
Yeah. People would ask me, when because, one of the things I would say is relax. And they say, how do you relax when you got somebody who's just attacking? I said, stop attacking back. Defend. And I said, when I get someone's guard and they put a hand in here, a lot of guys, what they do is they take the hand and they'll rip it away. If you have 40 pounds on me or so, and I take your hand and try to pull it off, sometimes it's not coming. And I invite everybody to do this when I'm in their guard. So one of the things, as soon as they put that, right away I put both hands on their other hand, on their wrist and on their arm. And I say, okay, choke me. And they have to free this, and a lot of times they're using the other hand to free it. So they pull the hand out to free it, and I go, okay, problem solved. And I just play with that. And probably the last time that I really mixed it up with somebody, probably about 15 years ago, I was in my mid-50s. I had a guy, was a student over at Krav Maga. He came from NYU, wrestled there for 4 years, one of the top guys, 5'6", 150 pounds. We weighed the same, but he was 30 some odd years younger than me. And he was a top-notch wrestler. I'm 55. I was playing around. So they said, Richard, this guy never gets tired. Wrestlers are the best conditioned athletes. And he was 21 years old. So they said, how do you relax with him? So I I went with the guy for about, maybe 3 minutes or so. And he was all over me, trying to attack this. And all I was doing is sitting back, got in side control, went to mount, but I really know the elbow escape very well. And all he knew was wrestling, so I would defend. Every single time he would try to mount, I would defend. He couldn't do anything. I didn't tap him, but that's not the important thing. He couldn't touch me. So I said, look, all I'm doing is doing my moves to defend what he's doing. I want to survive against a guy who's 30 plus years my junior. If I can survive someone like that, I'm happy. So they say, how do you relax? Learn the technique, study the technique, focus on relaxing. What's the worst that's going to happen? You'll get tapped. Go back and do it again. Hell, I mean, how many times did I get tapped? A lot.
Can you tell us about the evolution of your game, and what do you wish you were better at?
Jiu-Jitsu. I've become a very defensive. One of the things that I hear hit on, and I know Henner talked. Do you know who John Boyd was? John Boyd exactly. Was a black belt over. We were about the same age. He died about 5 years ago. After John got his black belt, he went into Henner's office and he said, I don't think I deserve the black belt anymore, because there's this guy who maybe, bigger, younger, maybe even blue belt or purple. And he said, I can't tap the guy. And so Henner said, look, when every 10 years, you lose your effectiveness. This is not an absolute. It's a general rule. 10 pounds. If you're learning the same thing, I'm 140 pounds and I'm 71. So my focus is on defending myself. If people attack, I can defend most people. But if I start mixing it up with them and start attacking them, that's where my timing is way off. But I can sit back and defend that. And my focus has been on survival. Hiran said this about Andre Galval in his match at Metamoris. He said, if I fought his game, good chance I would have gotten caught or lost. But he said, I could play my game and survive the whole time. And he never was in danger with Andre Galval. And people have said to me that, that guys say, oh, Richard, he just defended. And I says, oh yeah, you go and try to defend against a world champ and see how long you last. It's so easy to sit back and be a critic, but I've shared the mat with the best. And I mean, hit on Gracie, Chris Saunders, who is Hickson's first black belt, when he rolled with Hiran about, 10 years ago, I had a class with him. And I had a class with Hiran before that, after Hiran gotten really good. And I felt like a white belt. And then, but I was older. Chris is now maybe 60. And this was when he was 50, and he'd been a black belt for at least, 15 years from Hickson at the time. And Hiran called him up out of the blue and says, hey, why don't you come by for a class? And Chris calls me up and he says, Richard, he said, I felt like a frickin' white belt with this kid. He just, so it shows the evolution. And as we age, we just don't have that. So focus on what you're good at. Focus on what is the easiest thing to do. Stay relaxed and defend. I've demonstrated over and over. I had a white belt come in, a student of mine who's now a purple, but when he was blue a couple years ago, this guy came in who was in a competition school, and my guy tried to keep up with him, tried to attack as he was attacking. He almost got caught. He looks at me, and I just kind of said, I just gave him relax, just roll with him. Don't be so aggressive. And he finally tired the guy out, and he ended up tapping him. In other words, you're either going to be manipulated or influenced, or you're going to do the influencing. It's manipulation or the manipulator, or influencer, depending on what you want to call it. The stronger you are in your beliefs and your core knowledge, you can suck someone into your game. If you don't have that strong innate thing, you'll play their game. I want people to play my game. And that's one of the reasons why people have a hard time relaxing, because they haven't done it long enough. They get with somebody who's trying to take their head off, and they go into fight mode, and they revert back to what they have.
So, Richard, where can the listener get more information about you and everything that you got going on?
Well, they can go to richardbresler.com. My Instagram, I think, is, if you just put Richard Bresler, I think it's Richard dash or Richard underscore Bresler, and Facebook, it's Richard Bresler. I also have a YouTube page that I'm working on. And by the way, I will be, and I'm planning on doing this, don't know exactly when it's going to happen, I'm going to become a co-host of a podcast coming in the next...
in the future.
Yeah, in the very near future.
So we will leave all the links in the show notes for all of you to reach out to Richard. And don't forget to get his book, Worth Defending, on wherever you buy books. Yeah, Worth Defending.
Amazon. Amazon's the only place you can get it.
We appreciate you all, and join us next time. And Richard, thank you so much for your time. It really was an honor and such a joy to speak with you.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine.
Awesome. See you guys next time.